Have you ever watched a moment so pure, so radiant, that it felt like the world had stopped just to let it bloom, and then just a breath later, watched that same moment be shattered? Before we begin, I want to say something from the heart. I hope you and your loved ones are safe today, because this story will test what you believe about justice, about pride, and about how far a father's love can go when the world tries to strip his daughter of both. Now take a deep breath with me. Let's go back to where it all began. The streets of the city hummed with a soft quiet that only nighttime could bring. Streetlights cast a golden wash across the sidewalk, each glow stretching like memory down the block. And beneath that amber sky, Emily Carter walked alone. No rush in her step, no fear in her posture, just lightness, soft, floating, like the music she had played only hours before. She was still dressed in white, not just any dress, her performance dress, elegant, flowing, stitched with hope in every hem. And in her hands, she carried the program from that night's concert, her name printed right there, bold as ever. Emily Carter, solo pianist, Madison Hall debut. The applause still rang in her ears, but louder than the audience was the memory of her father's eyes. That morning, Nathan Carter, her rock, her root, her ritual, had sat her down before she walked out the door. He didn't speak much. Nathan was never one to waste words, but with strong hands and soft patience, he began braiding her hair, each strand slow, each movement sure. He'd done this since she was a little girl, when she had stage fright before her first recital, when she cried over her first lost competition, when she doubted she had what it took. And this morning, before the biggest performance of her life, he spoke just 4 words. "This is your crown." No sermon, no speech, just a father reminding his daughter that her worth didn't come from applause. It came from who she was and the legacy she carried in every braid on her head. Emily wore that crown proudly, and as she walked home that night, her fingers grazed the side of her scalp. Not to fix it, just to feel it. To remember that love, that pride, that history. She smiled to herself. For once, the world felt right. But peace, you see, peace is fragile. And for Black girls walking through the wrong part of town at the wrong hour of night, wearing the right kind of confidence, it becomes dangerous. Up ahead, a sharp voice cut through the stillness. Emily's steps slowed. Her eyes moved toward a flickering convenience store, the kind that never quite felt open or closed. 2 men stood beneath the neon light, one a store clerk, the other tired, slumped, desperate. They were arguing, loud, but not about her. Emily knew better than to linger, and still she paused, not because she wanted to interfere, but because something about the moment tugged at her spirit. The man's eyes kept darting toward the counter, voice rising with frustration and fear. Then a voice snapped from the side, not theirs. "Hey," Emily turned, not toward the argument, but to the voice behind her. A security guard, white, broad, with a jaw set like stone, was watching her now. Not watching the men, not watching the scene. Her. His eyes narrowed. Curiosity first, then suspicion, then something colder. "What are you doing here?" Emily blinked, confused, then cautious. I'm walking home," she answered, soft but clear. The guard didn't seem to hear. His hand was already on his radio. "Got a young Black female, late teens, loitering outside the store. Looks suspicious." Suspicious. The word hit like cold metal, not because she didn't know it, but because she knew it too well. Her voice tried again. "I was just walking." She showed her hands, stepped back, kept her tone low, measured, careful. But it didn't matter. The store clerk had stopped arguing. Customers had turned to stare. The air shifted. Judgment filled the space between them. "Let's see some ID," the guard demanded. Emily clutched her concert program a little tighter. For what? You're loitering, acting strange, might be up to something. And then came the lights. Red, blue, unforgiving. A squad car pulled in slow. The weight of state power rolled up on her in uniform. The officer stepped out, didn't ask, didn't assess. He saw a girl in a white dress with long braids and black skin. That was enough. Let's go, he said. Go where? Her voice barely above a whisper. We're taking you in. The concert program fell to the sidewalk. The steel closed around her wrists. Her crown, her father's hands, his love, his legacy, now felt like a target. And as she was led away under the glow of flashing lights, the only music left in the air was silence. The courtroom was cold, not by temperature, but by design. Marble walls, dark wood benches, and the hollow echo of polished shoes against tile all whispered the same message. This isn't your space. This isn't your home. Speak only if spoken to. But Emily Carter stood there anyway, still in the white dress that now bore the memory of pavement, still with the remnants of her crown, her braids, tucked tightly beneath her cuffed hands. Still believing somehow that reason might be enough. She didn't know the man who would decide her fate was someone who no longer recognized the line between law and control. Judge Victor Langley, a man feared in whispers and praised in headlines, silver hair combed back tight, black robe pressed sharper than his glares, and eyes, hawk-like, pale, unreadable, that never saw defendants, only threats. He had made a name for himself, not as a steward of the law, but as its executioner. To the public, he was strict. To prosecutors, dependable. To the powerful, men in suits who never showed their faces in court, he was useful. And to young black girls like Emily Carter, he was a name you prayed you'd never hear. Langley didn't look up when she entered, didn't ask what had happened, didn't open her file. He didn't need to. He had already decided. She was guilty, because to men like Langley, black girls didn't make it out at night in gowns unless they were up to something. Emily sat quietly at the defendant's table, alone, no lawyer, no parent, no advocate, just her voice. And in Langley's courtroom, that voice meant nothing. He finally looked up, tapped his fingers on the bench. A smirk teased the corners of his mouth. Let's get this over with. Emily swallowed the lump rising in her throat. Her wrists ached from the cuffs. Her dignity, still intact, clung to her like a trembling bird, but she steadied herself. She had done nothing wrong. Your Honor, Langley lifted a hand, dismissed her mid-sentence like a man brushing lint from his lapel. Miss Carter, he said smoothly, you've had quite the eventful evening, haven't you? Emily nodded. I was walking home from my concert. I wasn't... He chuckled. Not a warm laugh. Not even a disbelieving one. Just cold. Your concert, he repeated, as if the word itself offended him. Then, leaning forward, his voice dropped an octave, mocking, sharp. A girl like you, wandering that neighborhood, wearing that dress? His eyes flicked over her like she was an object on a table, not a person. Tell me, Miss Carter, were you really on your way home, or were you planning something else? Emily stiffened. She knew those words. They weren't questions. They were accusations draped in civility. I was walking home, she said again. Quieter this time. Langley didn't hear her. He didn't want to. He reached for her file, flipped it open, and then shut it without looking. Tell me something, he continued. A girl like you, out at night, dressed like that. What do you think people assume? The courtroom stirred. Someone stifled a laugh. A ripple of amusement, small but sharp, cut through the benches like a blade. Emily felt the heat rise in her chest, but not from shame, from rage, from knowing that this theater of prejudice had played out long before she arrived. Langley leaned back, folded his hands. "You see, Miss Carter, I've handled many cases just like yours, and every time they say the same thing. I didn't do anything." He let that hang in the air like a noose. "But let's be honest, if you were truly innocent, you wouldn't be here in the first place, would you?" Those words broke something in her, not hope, but the illusion that this was ever about justice. Because it wasn't. It never had been. This wasn't a hearing. It was a sentencing with choreography, a ritual in which guilt was assigned not by evidence, but by skin, by hair, by posture, by pride. Her father's voice echoed again. "This is your crown, Emily. Wear it with pride." But now she wondered, what happens when the court wants to rip that crown away? For a moment, everything went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that warns of a storm. Emily Carter sat frozen in her chair, hands clenched tight, eyes locked on the man who held her fate like it was a game piece. Judge Victor Langley sat above her, quiet literally, like a king overseeing a spectacle. And what came next wasn't law. It wasn't even punishment. It was humiliation packaged as justice. "It is the decision of this court," Langley announced, his voice cold and level, "that the defendant, Emily Carter, is guilty." Emily didn't flinch. She had already known, but Langley wasn't done. Number that would have been too easy. He smiled. That kind of smile only men who enjoy power too much ever learn how to wear. And then he said it. "As for your sentence, this court orders that your hair be cut immediately." The room didn't erupt. There were no gasps of disbelief, only silence, and then a low murmur, approval, sick curiosity. Emily didn't understand at first, not fully. Her hands moved instinctively to her head, to the braids, the ones her father had woven that very morning, the ones filled with patience and history and pride. Her voice came out in a whisper. "No." Langley raised an eyebrow. His grin widened. "You seem confused, Miss Carter. Allow me to clarify." He stood, slowly, with purpose. "These hairstyles," he said, gesturing toward her head like she were an exhibit in a museum, "are not just fashion. They're statements. And statements have consequences." He turned toward the courtroom, addressing them now as if they were his congregation. "This kind of appearance signals defiance, nonconformity, rebellion. And in this courtroom, my courtroom, we do not reward rebellion." Then, with finality, cut it all off. At first, even the bailiff hesitated. The room had gone from smug amusement to stillness. And yet, no one spoke. No one stood up. Not the prosecutor, not the clerk, not the spectators who had laughed minutes earlier. Because power, even when cruel, tends to keep people quiet. Langley noticed the pause, and his voice, this time sharper, cut through it. "Did I stutter?" The bailiff, unsure, walked toward the clerk's desk. He picked up a pair of scissors. Real, not symbolic. Emily's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a punishment. It was a ritual of erasure. She wasn't being reprimanded. She was being stripped. And for what? For existing in her skin, for wearing pride on her scalp, for walking while black, while braided, while unbowed. The scissors flashed in the light. Her hands trembled beneath the table, but she would not cry. She would not beg. She would not give Langley the satisfaction. Still, her heart pounded, because she knew this wasn't about hair. It never was. It was about making her small, making her less, making her forget who she was, where she came from, what she carried. The first cut was nearly silent, a whisper of metal through history. A braid, carefully woven by a father's hand, fell to the floor. Another followed, and another. With each soft snip, a part of her disappeared. The air kissed her scalp now, cold, unfamiliar, exposed. But still, she did not tremble. A mirror was placed in front of her, Langley's final flourish. "See what I've done to you?" Her reflection blinked back. No longer the girl who had walked into court, no longer the pianist from Madison Hall, no longer the daughter in white, but Emily Carter. Still, short hair, uneven, stripped bare, but not broken, not bowed, not erased. She looked up, directly into Langley's eyes, and what he saw there, not fear, not submission, not defeat, but promise, fire, something ancient, something that refused to die. Langley's smirk faltered, only for a second, but Emily saw it, and she remembered it, because this wasn't the end. This was the moment the reckoning began. The last braid had fallen, the scissors had stopped, but the silence in the courtroom remained. Emily Carter sat still, her back straight, her scalp bare, not by choice, by force. And Judge Victor Langley, satisfied, smug, steeped in his own performance, leaned back in his chair like a man who had finished carving a warning into flesh. He had made his point, or so he thought, because just then, the doors burst open, a heavy slam, a crack of thunder in a room full of stone. Heads turned, even Langley's. A man stood in the doorway, tall, broad, dressed in black. No robe, no uniform, but presence. It wrapped around him like armor. His steps were calm, measured, echoing across the polished floor like a countdown. And those who knew his name stopped breathing, because that name was carved into fear, Nathan Carter. Langley's jaw tightened. He knew the name. He had feared the name. Nathan Carter wasn't just any federal prosecutor. He was the one who didn't flinch, the one who brought down politicians, judges, men with long money and short morality, the one who walked into rooms where injustice reeked like rot and said, "Open the windows, I'm here to clean house." And now he wasn't walking in for a case. He was walking in for his daughter. Nathan didn't say a word at first. He didn't need to. The courtroom air thickened around his silence. When he stopped in the center of the room, Langley tried to recover his posture, straighten his robe, mask the unease in his voice. "This is irregular," Langley snapped too quickly. Nathan looked up, eyes sharp, voice steady. "Victor Langley," he said, "the real trial begins now." The words didn't rise in volume, but they landed. The bailiff froze mid-step. Reporters leaned forward. Even the clerks stopped flipping their papers. Langley blinked, once, then twice. He was a man who had sentenced thousands. But now he looked small. Nathan reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a black folder, unlabeled, thick, and dangerous. He laid it on the prosecutor's desk, quiet, deliberate. "For years," he said, "you've used this bench like a throne, handing out punishment without law, humiliation without cause, verdicts without truth." Langley opened his mouth. Nathan didn't let him speak. "You've buried lives with a smirk, but today we're digging them up." He opened the folder. Exhibit A, a recording. Langley's voice, crisp, clear. "Just make sure the money's wired before the verdict." Gas broke through the gallery. Langley's face paled. Exhibit B, financial statements, wire transfers, from shell companies to Langley's private accounts, labeled as consulting fees, all timed within days of high-profile sentencings. Langley's fingers curled around the edge of the bench. But Nathan wasn't done. Exhibit C, a list. 37 names, Nathan said. Wrongfully convicted, tied to your court, tied to your gavel. And at the top of that list, Emily Carter. Langley snapped, "This is a setup." His voice cracked. It was the first time in years he sounded afraid. "You don't get to march in here." Nathan stepped forward. His voice dropped, cold, truth slicing through the air like winter wind. You sentenced my daughter without a hearing. You took her crown, but the only thing falling today is you. And then, as if on cue, the doors opened again. Dark suits, tactical vests, FBI. Langley stood. You can't do this, he shouted now, his voice shrill, unraveling. 2 agents flanked him, calm, no expression. Victor Langley, the lead agent said, you are under arrest for corruption, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. The cuffs closed with a click that echoed like judgment. Langley twisted. This is political. This is vengeance. No one moved to help. Not the bailiff, not the prosecutor, not the gallery. Langley had ruled for decades. Now no one stood for him. He looked around one last time and saw her, Emily, still seated, still silent, but her eyes never left his. And for the first time, Langley saw it. Not the girl he tried to humiliate, but the fire he couldn't put out. The courtroom, his courtroom, was no longer silent out of fear. It was silent out of awe. Judge Victor Langley, once untouchable, once praised, once feared, now stood in handcuffs. His robe wrinkled, his face flushed, and for the first time in decades, his voice meant nothing. The FBI agents led him toward the exit. Each step echoed, and behind him no one moved, no one protested, no one pleaded on his behalf. Not the bailiff, not the prosecutors, not even the courtroom staff who had once scrambled to meet his gaze. He turned his head once, half desperate, to scan the room. No allies, no escape, just the quiet, undeniable truth. Power doesn't protect you when truth comes to collect. At the edge of the courtroom, Nathan Carter stood still, unblinking, unyielding, a father who had brought justice not just for his daughter, but for every name Langley had buried beneath his gavel. But Nathan didn't celebrate. There were no cheers, no gloating, only weight, and the heavy stillness that comes when justice finally arrives, too late for too many. And in the center of that storm, Emily Carter. She sat alone, not as a defendant, not as a victim, but as the last one standing, her scalp still bare, her gown still rumpled, her hands still folded in her lap, but her spine straight, her eyes unbroken. And as Langley was dragged through the doors, their eyes met one last time. He expected anger. He expected vengeance. But Emily gave him nothing. No nod, no word, no permission to haunt her further. Just silence. And in that silence, she reclaimed every piece of herself they tried to strip away. Outside, the courthouse steps were packed. Cameras, reporters, agents. And in the middle of it all, a black SUV. Its rear door swung open. Langley hesitated, one last time, as if some miracle might lift him from this. But none came. A push from the agent, and the door slammed shut, final, concrete, like a verdict that didn't need a jury. Inside the courtroom, Emily stood. She walked toward the exit, not rushed, not afraid, each step steady, deliberate, because the courtroom that had tried to erase her, she had outlasted it. The marble floors, the wooden rail, the high back bench where he once ruled, they all remained. But the power, that stayed with her, because some scars don't weaken, they sharpen. The dressing room was small, quiet, still carrying the warmth of a single overhead bulb that buzzed softly, like it, too, was holding its breath. Emily Carter stood in front of the mirror. Same mirror, same room, same frame around the glass that had once shown her the girl who played Madison Hall in white silk and braided gold. But now, a different reflection stared back. Her hair was gone, cut, jagged, uneven. Her face, the same, but something behind the eyes had changed. She reached up slowly, ran her fingers across her scalp. It didn't feel like shame anymore. It felt like truth. Not the kind they teach you in courtrooms, not the kind people in power pretend to uphold, but the kind you earn, the kind they can't take from you. She remembered sitting here days ago, her father behind her, his fingers weaving pride into every braid. "This is your crown, Emily," he had whispered. "Wear it with pride." Back then, she thought the crown was the braid, the pattern, the beauty, the care. But now? She understood. It had never been about the hair. The crown was in the stillness of her breath, in the silence she held when they wanted her to scream, in the way she looked at a man who tried to break her and didn't blink. The crown was in survival, in dignity, in the memory of who she was, even when they tried to rewrite her. Behind her, a sound, software familiar. A warm hand rested on her shoulder. She didn't need to look. She knew. Nathan, her father, her defender, her constant. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her in the reflection, both of them staring at the girl in the mirror. Then softly, more breath than voice, "Your crown was never something they could take." Her throat tightened. She placed her hand over his. Not a handshake, not a thank you, just a shared moment, a sacred vow. This wasn't about today. It wasn't even about Langley. It was about every girl who had ever been humiliated and told to stay quiet. Every son who had watched their mother be judged before she spoke. Every father who sat in silence, praying the system wouldn't take their child next. This wasn't a story of survival. It was a declaration. And Emily Carter wasn't a symbol of pain. She was proof that dignity doesn't die when it's attacked. It grows louder. The heavy courthouse doors creaked open. Emily Carter stepped out, not as a defendant, not even as a girl just freed from injustice, but as a presence. The marble steps beneath her feet seemed smaller now. The building behind her, once towering, cold, suffocating, was nothing but a wall of stone, and in front of her, the city waited. Cameras flashed, microphones rose, reporters shouted, but no one moved closer, because something in the air had changed. Not fear, not chaos, reverence, not for a politician, not for a celebrity, not even for her father, who walked quietly behind her, but for Emily, for a young woman who had been humiliated in public, stripped bare in front of strangers, and still walked forward with her spine straight and her silence louder than any statement. To one side, a man stepped out of a black SUV Langley, his wrists still cuffed, his jaw still clenched, his pride still fractured. But this time, he wasn't the center. No cameras turned toward him. No voices called his name. The man who once commanded silence was now invisible in the noise. Emily didn't even glance his way. She didn't have to. His story was already over. Hers had just begun. Langley was pushed into the FBI van. The door slammed. Steel swallowed him whole. And with that sound, cold, metallic, final, the crowd exhaled. Justice, long silent, had finally spoken. Emily walked down the steps, her father beside her. Their pace slow, steady, deliberate. Reporters leaned in, holding microphones like offerings. But she said nothing. Not yet. Because this moment wasn't about sound. It was about presence. It was about witness. Let them see her. Let them remember, not as a headline, but as a mirror, reflecting everything this system tried to deny. Halfway down the steps, someone called out, "Emily, how do you feel?" She paused, not to answer, just to stand, one hand still on her father's arm. Her shoulders relaxed, her head high. The sun caught her scalp, short, uneven, imperfect, but whole, because her crown had never been on her head. It had always been in her walk. The seal of the Department of Justice gleamed on the podium like it had been waiting for her all along. The crowd had gathered, not out of curiosity, but because something real had happened, something rare, accountability. And now they stood shoulder to shoulder, activists, neighbors, lawyers, mothers, daughters, watching the young woman who had survived humiliation walk up the steps and take her place behind the microphone. Emily Carter did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. The city was already listening. For too long, she began, her voice low but firm, justice has been a privilege, not a right. No anger, no theatrics, just truth, calm, unshakable. But justice, she continued, does not belong to men in robes or power suits. Justice belongs to all of us. And suddenly the crowd wasn't still anymore. They were nodding, crying, holding hands, because the pain she spoke of wasn't just hers, it was theirs. And finally, someone was saying it out loud. Behind her, Nathan Carter stood quietly, proud, unmoving, not as the powerful prosecutor, but as a father, the kind who weaves dignity into his child's hair and when they cut it, picks up every piece. Emily leaned in slightly. They tried to take my crown. A pause. But what they didn't know is that it was never made of hair. It was made of memory, of heritage, of everything this country still struggles to see. She stepped back from the mic, silence, then applause. Not the polite kind, not the stage kind, but weighty, rooted, honest. Later, a reporter caught up with her. "Emily, what's next?" She smiled, not big, just enough. "We keep going, because this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning." She turned, walked away from the cameras, the courthouse behind her, the city before her, the future, hers to claim. If this story stirred something in you, don't let it stop here. Like it, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that shine light into the corners we're told to ignore. Your voice matters, your presence matters, and together we keep pushing for dignity, for equity, for truth. Until next time, stay aware, stay grounded, and never forget, justice isn't given, it's made, one voice at a time.